Okay, we will be getting started now. So welcome everybody to our Intro to HTML and CSS workshop. As you would gather from the title, we will be going over some of the fundamentals of HTML and CSS today, and you will be able to build your own website. This workshop is hosted by PTC Calgary, and in case you don't know what PTC is Project Tech Conferences, and we mainly host events giving STEM opportunities for students.
All right, so just to start us off, I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with Zoom by now, but this is just a bit of housekeeping. So if at any time you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and that should be under your reactions button. If you have a question, feel free to DM any of the PTC members in private discussion. So you can click the bar and the pop-up will come out with different names, and you can choose to privately message whoever you want. And just another note that this event is being recorded for the PTC YouTube channel. So please keep your video off and muted, as well as please avoid conversing in the public chat too much, as that can get quite difficult to control. Yeah. So today on our agenda, we'll be going over what HTML and CSS is. We'll be setting up a workspace, and then we'll be going over our HTML lesson that will help you to make a skeleton recipe. And then we'll be going over our CSS lesson that can help you design and really spice up your recipe page. Lastly, we'll be discussing where to go from what you've learned and how to apply it from here today. So first, I think we should get a basic understanding of what HTML and CSS is. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's basically the standard language for every document that's going to be displayed in a web browser. So all of your Google documents, your Safari, they all use HTML. So HTML isn't a programming language exactly because it doesn't create a type of, it doesn't create functionality, but you can create different structure sections, paragraphs, and links using elements, tags, and attributes in HTML. HTML, it's basically like you're communicating with a browser and what you're trying to design. And so web browsers will receive your HTML documents from a web server and then render the documents into a web page. Next, we have CSS, and CSS is basically cascading style sheets. And CSS basically describes how HTML elements are supposed to be displayed on screen, paper, and other media. So if you think of your website as a Google Doc or like a Word document, HTML is basically the text, the content you have in your work document, whereas CSS is the toolbar you have on top. You can change your font, the color, how it's formatted, everything there. So CSS is basically made to enable the separation of your presentation content, so you can edit your layout, colors, as well as fonts. So that's just a brief overview of HTML and CSS. So today, with our guidance, basically you guys will be able to make a recipe page using HTML and CSS.
Okay, so now let's talk about how to set up the workspace that you'll use for this workshop. In the general chat, I've pasted a link, and if everyone in the meeting wants to click that, it'll bring you to a page called glitch.com. So basically, in the email you guys got before the meeting, you should have been told to make a glitch.com account, so you can sign in there, and if you don't have one, you can create one right now. So once you're on glitch.com, once you're on the site, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a button that says Remix Edit. If you don't see that, you can go to the left where the screen is right now, to the left, and it was under the title of the project, it'll say Remix, and you can click that as well. So once you click that, give it a second to load, it'll make you an own editable copy of the PTC template that you can edit and do anything you want to it. We'll be using this a little later. Okay, so back to the presentation. Once you're on the glitch page, in terms of file structure, you'll see a few things. So on the left, you'll see there's a document called index.html, and that's basically where all of your HTML code will be stored. It basically contains all the text and all the linked images. As like Andy said, it's basically all the text in your Google Doc. In terms of style.css is the document that contains all of your CSS code. So basically, it tells the site to style itself in a certain way. Assets are everything that's just used in the project. Okay, so if you want to add an asset to your site, if you go on Glitch, you can see that on the left side, there's a button called Assets. Yeah, and in the middle of the screen, sort of on the left, there will be a button called Upload an Asset. And if you click that, it'll give you a whole bunch of options as to what files you want to upload. Does anyone have any questions? Are we going too fast? Nope, okay. So the glitch screen is divided into two parts. On the left, you have an area for code. So this is basically where you're going to edit all of your HTML and CSS depending on the documents you select. And on the right, it'll be sort of a basic version of what your site will look like in real time. But if you want to see the full version of your site, like in a new page, you can go to a sunglasses icon on the top left. You can see right there. And instead of selecting next to the code, you want to select in a new window. So that'll open a new window where you can see the full version of your site. Okay, so just before we begin some of the other parts of the more technical parts of the workshop, I'll go over some general programming tips. So when you're coding, you want your code to be readable and well formatted. So this means that there should be proper indents and proper spaces. And what this does is it allows you as the writer of the code to more easily edit your code. But it also helps other people to more easily understand and edit your code as well. So just a side note, don't be afraid to Google things. I know a lot of people think that Google is unprofessional and stuff, but honestly, it's a very good resource as it contains a lot of information, and even very experienced developers who rely on Google pretty much every day. So in terms of web development resources, there's this website called W3 Schools, and it basically contains a lot of information on how to use HTML or CSS. It also tells you how to use programming languages as well. And another website called MDN Documentation or MDN Docs, it basically helps you become familiar with documentation, which would be a very useful skill for coding. Okay, I'll pass it over to Lucy, who will explain a bit more about HTML.
So to begin, we'll start with some basic knowledge. HTML elements are codes that consist of a start tag and an end tag. In most cases, both start and end tag have to be surrounded by open and closed angle brackets, and then the end tags always have to have a / after the open angle bracket. When it comes to HTML, we have tags that follow the basic rule of having opening and closing tags, and we also have tags that do not have closing tags. There is no specific way to tell if one needs a closing tag, as this is something that you just learn along the way as you start programming. At the core of HTML, tags are hidden keywords that tell your browser how to format and display each element of your website. They essentially provide the directions or recipe for the visual content that one sees on the web. Each piece of content you put on your website has to be inside a tag. To start off, we need to include a few things in our empty HTML file. These are required so that our computer knows what we're working with. First of all, a doc type declaration. This is not a tag, it just defines the document type, or in short, it tells the computer what type of document to expect. This has to go at the very beginning of your document. Next, we have the HTML tag. This tells the computer where the HTML code starts and ends, with the end tag always having that /. This tag is actually the root of the HTML code and the document, as all the other tags of the HTML document lies inside it. And then, then inside we can start writing our HTML code. HTML documents are usually split into a few parts. We have the head, which will include the title of the web page and other important elements that are not seen on the web. And then the head's job is basically to contain metadata, which is data that provides information about other data. So this data can include the chart set being used, the description or the author. And then again, the head is placed between the HTML tag and the body tag. Next, we have the body tag. The body tag is usually what defines what needs to be seen by you and other viewers inside your website, as it contains all the actual content of your site. This can contain text, paragraphs, headings, images, tables, or videos. As seen on the slides, the body tag is placed inside the HTML element after the head element. Lastly, comments are very important little notes explaining certain part of your code for yourself or for other developers who will be looking at your code. This can help you when you edit the source code at a later date, which is especially useful if you have a lot of code to work with. Next, we have some commonly used tags. We have the heading tag, which is used to distinguish between different sections of information, similar to headings in an essay. You can have different levels of headings with H1 enclosed in open and closed angle brackets being the highest level, and then H6 being a lower level. Dev tags are container tags that you can use to divide content. It will not affect the content of your web page when it shows up. So basically, it's just used to define a division or a section in an HTML document. And then again, the end tag for this tag also has a /. Next, we have paragraph tags, which are used if you want to start a paragraph in your text. They have both closing and opening tags. So anything mentioned within open and close angle bracket P and open and close angle bracket P with / is treated as a paragraph. If you would like a line break in this paragraph, you'll have to add the BR tag, which is useful if you're writing addresses or poems. And then this tag is, the BR tag is an empty tag, which means that it has no end tag. And then lastly, we have the image tag, which is used if you want to add an image to your website. The image tag does not need a closing tag. So the best way to put it on, like an image on your website, is to download the image and then place it in the directory of your page. Then from there, you can fill out the mandatory attributes, which includes src. This shows where the image is located in your directory, and alt, which specifies an alternative text for the image. So if your image for some reason cannot be displayed, you have the alternative tag there. And then image attributes can also be used if you want use for screen readers. And then we'll start off with activity 1. You can start to add your own recipe by changing the recipe title, the recipe description, the photo, ingredients, or the materials needed.
And we'll just give you a couple minutes to work through this first activity. The recording will be stopped in the meantime. We'll be going through the solution just in case you guys didn't manage to finish it. And then Zach, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so you guys could have done anything here because the first activity, you're just supposed to enter a title, a short description, an image of and the ingredients and materials required for your own recipe. So you guys could have chosen any recipe. For me personally, I like pizza, so I can go ahead and change my header here to my pepperoni pizza recipe. Right, and this header, it shows on my actual website. You can also change your description to sort of reflect the ingredients and materials you need for the recipe. And yeah, you can also include in your assets a picture, which I think I have here. And upload a file. Upload this pizza image. And I can copy the link, go into my image source, and upload it. So there's my pepperoni pizza image, my pepperoni pizza header, and you can modify this brief description with the paragraphs to sort of just explain your recipe. And that's essentially how you do the first activity. You're just messing around with it, and it's not much serious coding, but yeah, it's just a good way to explore the basics of HTML.
All right, so now that you guys know some HTML, you can essentially design your own website. However, your website may look generic or even boring, so I'm going to walk you through how to change this using CSS. If any of you guys have questions when I'm going over this, feel free to just type them in chat and let me know. Okay, so if you think of HTML as the skeleton of your website, then CSS would be the skin and clothing that you'd put on top to make it look nice. Styling HTML is usually done externally. And what this means is that the HTML file is linked to a separate CSS file. And you can find this on your glitch page. One of the reasons that we do this is so that we can link multiple HTML files to the same CSS file. Then all of your pages would share the same styling, and it saves you from writing code for each page individually. If you think to all of the websites that you've been on, each of the pages look really similar, right? With the same background color or font. All right, so if we want to start writing CSS, we should learn how the code is organized first. CSS code is written in these units called rule sets, and each rule set is made of two main parts. The first is the selector, and this part identifies the elements from your HTML file that you want to style. So for example, P would select all of the paragraph elements in your HTML file. You'll learn more about different selectors later in the workshop. You follow the selector with a set of curly brackets, which contains the second part of the rule sets, the declaration. The declaration describes how you want the elements you've selected to look. In other words, it lists out the properties that you want these elements to have. Each line in your declaration should have two parts, a property name and a corresponding property value. The property name identifies which property you want to change. So this could look like things like color or font size. And property values describe what you want to change the property to, for example, blue or 12 pixels. You should end each line with a semicolon in order to tell the computer that you're done describing this property. There are a lot of different properties in CSS, but we can start with three main groups. The first are the text properties, which include the color of the text, the line height, the text align, and any other properties that might describe what the text on your page would look like. The second category are size and position properties. So these are things like width, height, and padding. And the final group are the font properties, which include font size, font weight, and font family. Like all other programming languages, CSS uses specific syntax, which you could think of as like the grammar rules of a programming language. If the syntax of a rule set is even slightly off, then the computer won't understand the code and your CSS will not work. Some things that you should be aware of are to always surround the declaration block in curly brackets, to separate the property name and property value with a colon, and to end each property line with a semicolon. If any of these properties are missing, your code will not work. As a Canadian, you should probably also pay attention to spelling, and the main property that we have trouble with is color. So if you use COLOUR with a Canadian U as opposed to COLOR, your code will also not work. Okay, so now that we know the basics of CSS, we can start our first activity. If you navigate over to your glitch page, you can see if you can change the background of the color of the web page. The first thing that you're going to want to do is open up your CSS file, which you find on the left-hand side, called style.css.
Okay, so let's just say you want to set your background color and you don't like the color Alice blue, right? So over here, we have this very nice little link that just shows you all the CSS colors and also the hexadecimal codes, right? So basically what you really need to do is you find a color that you really like. For example, I found this color, blanched almond, and you just paste it in, and yeah, that's basically how you change your CSS background. It's quite simple.
Okay, so now we'll be moving back to HTML, but this time we're going to be moving on to some more advanced HTML tags and tools. So these are useful for some more complex sites that have a lot more functionality. So first up, we have the hyperlink tag. Obviously, your sites might not necessarily contain all the content you want, and you might need to redirect your users to other sites to get all the information that they might need. And you do so by inserting these hyperlink tags. These are very, very common. You've probably seen or used them before, but for those who aren't familiar with what hyperlinks look like, you can see here the word Google is what hyperlinks typically will look like on websites. So basically how you do this in HTML is that you can attach these hyperlinks to text. So inside of the opening bracket or opening tag, as you can see on the screen here, you use href equals and then insert the site URL. For example, here we have www.google.com. And then that will insert the hyperlink to the text. And then when you click on the text, or when the user clicks on the text, that'll take them to whatever URL you've put in. Okay, moving on to some lists. So obviously lists are very useful, and if you have a lot of things you want to write down, lists are probably the easiest way to do so. There are two main types of lists, bulleted lists and numbered lists. So for a bulleted list, you would use UL in your opening and closing tags. And then for a numbered list, you would use OL in your opening and closing tags. And then within these opening and closing tags, you'll have tags with li inside of them surrounding each object of the list. And as shown on the screen here, that's how it will look when you put down the list. Okay, we'll also be talking about something called attributes. These are really useful for distinguishing or grouping parts of your code together. Kind of think of it as putting stuff in boxes and then labeling them. And then these will be written in the opening tag of the object, kind of similar to how the hyperlinks were put in. First up, we have our ID attribute. The ID attribute identifies the given tag. Basically, this is really useful for when you have to call on that specific tag later on. And as you can see on the screen, this is done using ID and then equals whatever you want the tag to be identified as in the opening tag. And then we have our class attribute. So this groups things under a name you give it. This is really useful for performing actions on more than one element at a time. For example, if you want to put some CSS styling on a certain group of objects, this can be useful as an identifier. And then this is done using kind of similar to the ID tag, use class equals and then the name of the class in your opening tag, as you can see on the screen. And then these classes, like I mentioned earlier, can be called on later, and this will affect all elements of that class. Okay, now we'll be moving on to a slightly more advanced HTML task. Basically, what we want you to do is you want to create an ordered list of instructions and ingredients for your recipe. And then if you'd like, if you're finished making the ordered list, you can hyperlink another recipe if you'd like on top of your own. So we'll give you a couple minutes to work through that, and then we'll move on to our next section of the lesson. Okay, we'll go over our solution for activity 2, and then we'll move into the last little bit of our presentation.
Okay, so activity number 2. So basically, what we're supposed to do is, in order to create a numbered list, we have to use our numbered list tags, which is, in this case, will be OL, and our list tags, which is LI. And in these, you can just include, I guess, your recipes, like, or the steps to create your brownie, your pizza, or whatever you're making, right? So for me, preheat the oven. Make the dough. Oh, I'm bad at spelling. Make the sauce. And if you have something like this, you should probably, yeah, so just a numbered list like this right here under the materials. And in regards to the hyperlink we mentioned earlier, you have the href, and then equals, and then in quotations, you just include the link that you want to include. So for example, this is the link that I used. And for your text, you can include something like describing the link, like pepperoni pizza. It should show up somewhere here. Here, this is my hyperlink. Yep. So yeah, that's essentially how you do activity number 2. Now back to our presentation, and I think Akshat will go over CSS part 2.
Perfect, thanks, Zach. So in this section of the workshop, we're going to be switching gears back into CSS. I'll be expanding on various CSS selectors, which will allow for increased precision when styling your HTML web pages. As Lucy and Sunny mentioned in the HTML sections, elements can have different attributes such as class and ID. These, along with a few other types, can be used to group elements with a certain rule set in CSS. The first selector we're going to be talking about is the element selector. As Jessica mentioned, it selects HTML elements based on the element name. So as we see on the presentation right now, we're selecting the element P or the paragraph element, and then we are applying the CSS styling that we want to. Next, we have the ID selector. It uses the ID attribute of an HTML element, which is unique across the HTML file, to select a specific element. The element is selected using a hashtag or a pound key on your phone, followed by the ID of the element. So in this case, as we see in the presentation, we have the pound or the hashtag, and then we have the ID name, and then the CSS styling. A reminder that to use this selector, you must include the hashtag. Next, we're going to be moving on to the class selector that uses the class attribute of an HTML element to select a specific element. The element is selected using a period or a dot followed by the ID of the element. Just like the ID selector, a reminder that the syntax here is very vital and that you must include a period before you declare which element you are selecting and the CSS declarations. And finally, the last selector we're going to be talking about in this presentation is the grouping selector, which selects all the HTML elements with the same style definitions. To elaborate, it is selected by adding each HTML element followed by a comma. So once again, on the presentation, when we're using the grouping selector, we're using 3 HTML elements, H1, H2, and P1 with the same style definitions. And then we're using all those elements and we're creating them with the color green. There are also other types of selectors that we didn't cover in this presentation, such as the universal selector. But if you guys are interested in looking at those selectors and their functionality within HTML and CSS, we encourage you to check out resources such as W3 Schools. But nonetheless, let's move into our second CSS activity. We want you guys to change the font of the header of your site that you guys have been working on Glitch. A reminder that if you guys have any questions, once again, you're more than welcome to message any of us, and we'll give you guys just a couple of minutes to work on the activity.
Okay, so hopefully you were able to get through that activity as well. Zach, would you like to present the solution?
Yeah, sure. So the activity, which was to create a CSS rule for the title of your site, I think we actually meant the header. So if you remember here, we have our H1, which is our title of the site. So what we're supposed to do is in CSS, we're supposed to create a CSS rule and just change the font, right? So you could do something like H1, which is your header, right? And then if you want to change the font, you can just do font family, and you can choose whatever font you'd like. But here I have Lucida handwriting. Oop. And yeah, and if I add semicolon for proper syntax, you get this, and you change the font. And you can also do this for, you could even put this for your paragraph, right? And change it like here, or you could even use the grouping selector, the comma, and you can change both the paragraph and the header to change your font. So yeah, that's essentially, I guess, the basic gist of CSS. And yeah, hopefully you guys experimented, had fun with it. And I guess I'll pass it off to Akshat to finish off with CSS layouts and divs.
Perfect. So in the last section of our workshop, we're just going to be touching upon CSS layout and divs, as Zach mentioned. So a web page, as you guys will see on the screen right now, is made up of different components, including headers, menus, content, and a footer. As mentioned by Lucy earlier, divs are a major aspect of web development, especially in terms of the layout of the website. Simply put, they are containers that you can use to hold content, such as text and images. Note that when we have used the divs in our slides, we have added a period or a dot before the div as required when declaring CSS rules for classes. You can style divs using properties like padding, which will help you place your content where you want it to be. You can see this on our example on the slide. You can also use CSS Grid or CSS Flexbox to help put your divs where you want them to be on your web page. While we didn't cover them in this workshop today, this will also help make your site responsive, and it will make them more readable on your phones and on other platforms. If you guys are interested in learning more about web development, CSS Grid, or CSS Flexbox, we would strongly suggest that you guys consider resources such as MDN Docs, which Andrew mentioned earlier, W3 Schools, or freecodecamp.org, the last of which has a free development course on CSS and HTML. Now, with regards to where to go from here, we'd encourage that you guys try to create your own website from scratch, for example, a personal portfolio site. Look into CSS Grid and CSS Flexbox through the websites that we mentioned, those being MDN Docs, W3 Schools, and Free Code Camp. And we would also encourage that you guys try to make your sites from today more dynamic and be able to use and take user input. For this, you might want to look into JavaScript. And with that, we will conclude our introductory HTML and CSS workshop. First and foremost, we'd like to thank all of you for coming to this workshop. We hope that we were able to provide you with the basic foundations of HTML and CSS and have encouraged you enough to continue your programming journeys here on out. Just a reminder that PTC will be hosting various other workshops and events throughout the years, including hackathons and other competitions. So we'd strongly encourage you guys to follow us and check us out on all of our social medias, those being our LinkedIn, our website, www.ptc.com, our Facebook, and our Instagram. Before you guys leave today, we have a short feedback form for all of you guys to fill out. It should take no longer than 2 minutes, and this is just so that we can improve your guys' experience for all of our further workshops that we do in the future. Once again, thank you so much for attending our workshop today. We hope that you guys were able to learn something. And with regards to what you guys have done today, you guys can keep working on these websites. And once you guys are happy with how they've come out, you're more than welcome to send your projects to our email if you'd like. And yeah, that will conclude our workshop for today. Please make sure to fill out the type form, and thank you so much for coming.